I want to quickly talk about barriers to communication. We know that communication is the key when it comes to any relationship, not just marriage. Obviously, things are magnified in marriage, but communication is key in your friendships, in relationships with your family, with work, right? A lot of times, even at work, you miscommunicated. And so then there's an issue that happened because somebody misunderstood. And if you're in the health profession, your miscommunication can even kill a patient. I worked for the Air Force years ago. And in the clinic I worked, there was a case study where the medical staff had put an X where a person's leg was supposed to be cut off. Guess what? They ended up cutting the wrong leg. That was a huge gap in communication. Miscommunication can lead to you losing a big loss. You can lose money, you can lose a life, you can lose something precious. We cannot afford to miscommunicate, right? All right. So there are barriers to communication, and I want us to quickly go over a couple of the barriers. All right. In marriage specifically, you want to be effective in how you communicate. Of course, all relationships, but marriages are a lot more, face these things so much more, because there are things that you're already personally dealing with as an individual. So when you get to your spouse, you naturally just push that on them. All right. When it comes to miscommunication, some of the barriers is basically your trauma. Trauma is what you've gone through in the past. We understand that. Traumatic events are events that happened somewhere in our past. Maybe when we were younger, or even an accident as an adult is a traumatic experience. So if you're not careful, you will allow those traumatic experiences to guide your behavior. But as humans, our needs drive our behavior. The things that we want, the things that we need to be sustained is the reason why we do what we do. So when you're hungry as an individual, you may act a certain way. You might be a little bit more impatient when you order your food. Your needs, because you're in need of food right now. When children cry, when babies cry, they're in need to be fed, right? And it drives their behavior, which is crying for attention, crying to be soothed, whatever the case may be. So just as a baby, when you want to be soothed and you're not soothed, right? You become aggressive, you become mad, you throw a tantrum. So we're not that much different, all right? We're not that much different than children when it comes to the way we handle our relationships. We're not very different. So every time you find yourself in a corner, think about a child, how a child throws a tantrum. As an adult, you throw a tantrum by becoming passive aggressive. That's one of the biggest barriers to communication. What is passive aggressiveness? Passive aggressiveness is when someone has done something to you, you don't like what they did, and you're not able to communicate to them. You don't address it with them. You don't say it to them. Like you hear somebody talked about you. Instead of going to say, hey, I heard what you said, or did you say that? You become upset and you don't ask them and you're just mad. So when they ask you a question, you just kind of like give them whatever answer you feel like. When they ask you for something, you're like, you roll your eyes. You're passive aggressive. You're not willing to be nice to them. You don't smile at them. You just find every cause to be rude to them, or you just ignore them. The silent treatment comes from passive aggressiveness. And a lot of people are very good at silent treatment. With their family members, with their friends, you call them, they don't answer. They send you to voicemail, because now they feel a certain type of way towards you. All right. So that's one barrier, passive aggressiveness. The next barrier I want to talk about is lack of empathy. Empathy is the way you feel. It's your ability to feel what someone else is feeling. You're not necessarily sympathizing with them where you're like, my feet is in your shoes necessarily. But empathy is, you come home and you tell your spouse or you tell a friend, oh my goodness, can you believe that, I called this place and I ordered something. When I got there, the thing was not ready and I need this today. And the person, instead of saying, well, you should have ordered, 2 days ago. You know how people want to tell you, I told you so? I told you so is not empathy. I told you so hinders your ability to go back and even trust the person again, because you can't trust them with your feelings, right? You're at your lowest. You go to your friend, to a spouse, to a parent. You go and you tell them, look, I haven't gotten my order. And they tell you, oh, well, that's unfortunate. I can imagine how that feels. I'm so sorry to hear that. Sometimes when you say sorry to people, it's not your fault, but you're trying to show empathy to the person that you don't deserve this. This shouldn't have happened to you. I can imagine how you feel. So when you're empathizing, you're not necessarily resolving anything for the person. You're not fixing anything, but you're allowing them, right? It's like you want them to know that you're with them. That's all. That's all you're doing. You're showing some kind of care. You don't lecture them. So when your spouse is wrong and they know they're wrong and they came and told you, you don't lecture them at that point, because already you won the battle. Does that make sense? So you want to be able to be empathetic towards people. Empathy will allow you to listen to people and listen well. All right? So that's number 2. Let's move to lack of validation. When people are not validated, it hinders communication completely. You're talking to your spouse, and I keep saying spouse because I can't think of a better example. You're talking to your spouse and they're like, you know what, forget it. They don't feel validated. They come to you, they tell you something, and you're like, but no, like, okay, I don't like, you go to a friend, you tell them, look, I don't like how you spoke to me in front of people. And your friend tells you, I was just joking. The fact that you were joking does not negate the fact that they feel as though you embarrassed them. Does that make sense? The fact that you're joking, your intent to joke does not negate how they feel. Validation is allowing the person to feel what they feel and acknowledging their feelings. It doesn't make it right and it doesn't make it wrong for you. It doesn't make it right for them or wrong for you. What it does is acknowledge that I understand how that made you feel. That's validating the individual. So you're speaking and someone cuts you off. So later they say, you kind of cut me off. I didn't even get to explain what I meant. And you're like, well, what I was trying to say is no. Oh, I understand how that may have made you feel. You didn't feel validated. So I'm sorry that I cut you off. You need to acknowledge. Validation comes with acknowledgement, letting the person know. So how we intend to make other people feel does not negate how they actually feel. So if you're cracking a joke and it was a bad joke, you can't say because it was a joke, they shouldn't feel mad or they shouldn't feel bad, okay? Even though it's a joke, it doesn't matter. The fact that they feel that what you said hurt them, you acknowledge the hurt. I'm sorry you felt that way. This is all part of effective communication. Many refuse to effectively communicate. 1, because they don't know how. And 2, because they probably do know what to do, but they refuse to do it. All right? But I like to think that a lot of times people don't know how to communicate. So this is why I'm here as your coach, to help you learn better ways to communicate so that your relationships can be healed, so your relationships can be improved, because you cannot afford to go through relationships with friends, with family, and just miscommunicate every which way you turn. It is your job when you're communicating to make sure that the listener understands what you're saying. All right? If they don't understand, you need to clarify. And also for you, the listener, it's your job to ask for questions and clarify. If there's something a speaker is saying that you don't get, don't just stay there and say, oh, I thought. Don't think anything. Don't assume, because assumption has no place in communication. Clear, concise communication comes from actively listening to the person, asking questions, participating, nodding, being aware, being present. So putting away the phone when you're communicating, etc., etc. So what did I talk about? I talked about passive aggressiveness. I talked about empathy. Number 2, I talked about lack of validation. And now betrayal. So I'm going to give you just the 4 tips, right? 4 barriers to communication. Betrayal is huge, is a massive one. When I say betrayal, I'm talking about cheating. I'm talking about lying, lack of transparency, right? When someone is betrayed, maybe you didn't cheat on the person, at least as you know culturally, but you were on Facebook making comments on a sexy picture. Like, no. If you're married, you have no business trying to make another man feel better about themselves. No, that's not your job, to make your coworker feel good about themselves. No, it's not your job. You can say you look nice. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's really not even something you should get into. Like, if they look nice for themselves. Does that make sense? But there's nothing wrong with acknowledging it, but it blurs the lines. Try to stay away from commenting on the opposite sex if you are married. Just stay away from it, because it takes one thing that leads to another, and I'll make a video on that, so look out for it. All right. So betrayal, someone cheats and then they say, oh, I'm sorry, and then they want it to be over. Like, I said sorry, so why are you still mad? Listen, betrayal creates trauma. All right. It's called betrayal trauma. I didn't even know that was a real term. But betrayal creates trauma. And that trauma can stay with the person the entirety of their marriage. I remember one time when I used to do therapy, marriage counseling, I had a couple, and the woman had been married for over 20 years. And she was telling me a story of what happened in their marriage and why she was feeling the way she felt. When she finished, I had to ask her, when did this happen? Because she told the story as if it happened yesterday. She did. She told the story like this happened yesterday. But later on, the husband said, this happened 20 years ago. I could not believe it for the life of me. And he said, ever since then, I've never done this again. I did this to her, but ever since then, it's been 20 years. I have not done such a thing to her again. The woman was stuck 20 years ago. So the marriage, they were facing separation. There was nothing that could happen. What happened is she never healed from the betrayal trauma. And he thought it was over and done. And he kept living and he kept going on. But she stayed there. And that is what trauma does to us. When you're a child and you go through abuse, your brain is stuck at the year of abuse. So you could be 40 right now. But whatever happened to you at 10 years old is what's in your mind. It's what's normalized. It's what's ahead of you. Does that make sense? So if you're not careful, you will continuously have barriers to communication in every relationship. Your friends will tell you, they will misunderstand you. At work, people won't understand you at work. In your relationship. So everywhere you show up, you're the commonality. You have to learn to communicate effectively. It's your job to communicate effectively. And it's your job to learn to listen actively when people are speaking to you, so you understand what they're saying, so that you're present and alert and knowledgeable on what they're telling you, and you understand what they're saying. And if you don't understand, please relate it to the individual. All right? Which is why I statements are important. I statements is, I feel bad, which bad is not a feeling. So I feel neglected when you go to work and don't call me for 12 hours or for 10 hours, So I feel neglect. So you tell the individual what your feeling is, and you explain why. So I statements help you to not place blame on the other individual, because what you're doing is communicating a need. Communication is important because it communicates a need. If you communicate your need effectively, perhaps that other person is able to fulfill that need. But if I don't know what you need and I'm asking you, are you okay? Do you need me to? Nope, I'm fine. Then be fine. Because if you're fine and now you're passive aggressive, you are communicating ineffectively. The person cannot hear you. They will not know what you need. Needs drive behavior. Remember that. Needs drive behavior. If I need something, if my needs are not met, I'm going to be frustrated. This is why a lot of relationships are on the rocks. A lot of friendships are not lasting. A lot of marriages are on the rocks because there are needs in that marriage that are not being fulfilled. And when your needs are not met, whether it's sexual, emotional, spiritual, when those needs are not met, believe me, you will be frustrated. And out of that frustration, you react towards your spouse. And what ends up happening, you get tired of them. So your kids, you're talking to your kids, they're not listening. You're talking to your kids, even in parenting, right? You're talking to them, they're not listening, they're not listening. At some point, you're like, you know what? I'm done. Like, you're done. I'm not going to deal with this. And you don't want to deal with your children anymore. You get tired and overwhelmed with your children. You don't want that. You don't want that. Because I know you love them. And I know you want to be there for them. And I know you want to teach them. But the way to do that is to be able to stand and cut out the barriers to effective communication. Those barriers are like noise. I know you hear music in the background a little bit. If the music was super loud, you won't hear me. That's a barrier to communication, because the communication is a two-way street. It's not just one way. So if I talk, you don't understand what I'm saying, I'm not communicating effectively. And if you're listening, you don't get it, you're also not hearing effectively. You're not listening actively. Because part of active listening is to be able to ask questions and clarifying and talking back and reflecting back to the person what you think you heard. Okay? So again, subscribe to my channel. I hope this channel is really building you, helping you, and growing your faith in Christ. Because, today's world, we're believers. I know not all of you here are believers, and you're welcome to the family regardless. But as a believer, there's so many distractions and so many different attacks on us. But attacks on our relationships, again, is an attack on the kingdom of God. So we want to be able to withstand and be examples to those around us. There may be times where there are people that are bound to miscommunicate. They're bound to misunderstand you. You cannot cause someone that wants to misunderstand you to understand. You just can't. They're bound on finding things wrong with you, and that's what it is. You just settle with it. But you still have to communicate effectively to them. I guarantee you in due time, they will come around. So hit that bell and subscribe to the channel. You are blessed and you are highly favored. Take care.